The night your life falls apart might be the night destiny quietly walks in. The ballroom of the Grand Wellington Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and soft golden light, the kind of place where every plate looked like art and every guest wore confidence like a designer suit. Yet Emily Carter stood near the edge of the room, feeling like she had accidentally stepped into someone else's life. Her pale blue dress was elegant but modest, carefully chosen after weeks of saving, and the diamond ring on her finger caught the light each time she nervously twisted it. Tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of her life, the celebration of her engagement, the beginning of a future she had believed in for 3 long years. Conversations hummed around her, glasses clinked gently, and a jazz trio played a soft melody near the stage, but something in the air felt wrong. Then it happened. At the center of the room, her fiancé Daniel cleared his throat and raised his glass. Emily expected a romantic speech. Instead, his words landed like cold rain. He spoke about ambition, opportunity, and difficult choices, and within seconds the room shifted from celebration to stunned silence. Daniel announced that the engagement was over. He explained it calmly, almost politely, as if canceling a dinner reservation rather than a life promise. His family stood beside him, composed and approving, while whispers rippled through the guests like a quiet storm. Emily felt every eye turn toward her. Heat rushed to her cheeks, and suddenly the room that had felt so grand now felt unbearably small. She didn't argue. She didn't cry in front of them. Instead, she simply removed the ring, placed it gently on the table beside the untouched champagne, and walked toward the exit before anyone could see the tremble in her hands. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around her like a second chance to breathe. Rain had begun to fall, thin and steady, tapping softly against the marble steps of the hotel. Emily stepped under the awning, staring out at the dark streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, trying to understand how a future could disappear in less than 60 seconds. A black luxury sedan rolled slowly to the curb, its headlights cutting through the rain. The engine quieted, and for a moment the street was silent except for the gentle patter of water. The rear window lowered just enough for her to see the outline of a man sitting inside. He looked to be in his early 30s, sharply dressed, calm in a way that didn't belong to chaos. His eyes studied her for a moment, thoughtful rather than curious, as if he had just watched an unexpected scene unfold. Then he opened the car door and stepped out beneath the rain. "You look like someone whose night just collapsed," he said quietly, his voice steady, almost sympathetic. Emily let out a small, breathless laugh. "That obvious?" The stranger nodded once, then said something so unexpected that it made the world pause again. "Marry me tonight." The words hung in the cool air between them, impossible and strangely serious. Emily blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" The man met her gaze without hesitation, reins sliding down the shoulders of his tailored coat. "I know it sounds insane," he said, "but I need a wife tonight, and you need a new beginning." Emily stared at him, the mysterious stranger standing beneath the streetlight like a question she had never imagined answering. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the falling rain, the first page of a completely different story began. Emily Carter had always believed that life followed a simple order: work hard, be kind, trust the people you love, and eventually everything would fall into place. Yet as she stood beneath the glowing hotel awning with rain whispering across the quiet street, she realized that order had shattered only minutes ago. The stranger waited patiently, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, as if asking a woman he had never met to marry him was the most reasonable idea in the world. Emily studied his face more carefully now. He was calm, composed, the kind of man who seemed completely at ease even in the middle of someone else's disaster. The streetlight reflected faintly in his gray eyes. "You cannot possibly be serious," Emily said finally, folding her arms as the rain cooled the heat still burning in her cheeks. The man gave a small nod. "I am completely serious." For a moment, Emily almost laughed again, but something in his voice stopped her. It was not playful or careless. It sounded deliberate, like someone presenting a business proposal. "You do not even know my name," she said. "Emily Carter," he replied quietly. Her eyes widened. "How do you know that?" He gestured lightly toward the glowing windows of the ballroom behind them. "Your former fiancé said it several times during his announcement." Emily looked back toward the building where her life had unraveled just moments earlier. Through the tall windows, she could still see silhouettes moving inside. People returning to their conversations, already forgetting the girl whose engagement had just collapsed in front of 300 guests. The stranger stepped slightly closer, but still kept a respectful distance. "My name is Alexander Hayes," he said. The name sounded familiar, though Emily could not immediately place why. Alexander Hayes continued speaking with quiet clarity. "I realize how unusual this sounds, so I will explain. I need to be legally married tonight." Emily blinked again. "Why?" "Because tomorrow morning the board of my company will attempt to remove me as chief executive officer," he said simply. Emily stared at him, unsure whether she had stepped into a strange dream. Alexander continued calmly. "They want me to marry the daughter of one of our largest investors. It is their condition for approving a merger worth several $billion. If I refuse, they will claim I am unstable and force a leadership vote." Rain slid down the edge of the awning, tapping softly onto the pavement between them. "And marrying a stranger solves that problem?" Emily asked cautiously. Alexander nodded once. "If I am already legally married, their plan collapses. They cannot force the arrangement." Emily let out a slow breath, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Only 10 minutes earlier she had lost the future she thought she wanted. Now a mysterious man with the calm confidence of someone used to running an empire was asking her to step into a completely different one. "You realize," Emily said slowly, "that I am the worst possible candidate for something like this. I work at a public library. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. My entire savings account would not even pay for the tires on that car." Alexander glanced toward the sleek black sedan parked at the curb, then back at her. For the first time, a faint smile appeared. "That is exactly why I chose you." Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alexander said gently, "that you have nothing to gain from pretending to love a billionaire, which makes you the most trustworthy person in this entire city tonight." Emily looked at him again, rain falling softly around them. And for the first time she felt the strange possibility that the night which had ruined her life might also be opening a door she had never imagined walking through. For several long seconds, Emily Carter said nothing. The rain continued falling softly across the quiet street, while the glowing windows of the Grand Wellington Hotel reflected behind them like a world she had just stepped out of forever. Across from her, Alexander Hayes waited with remarkable patience, as though he had already decided the outcome and was simply allowing time to catch up with it. Emily exhaled slowly and looked at him again, studying the calm confidence in his expression. "Let me understand this," she said carefully. "You are asking a woman you met 5 minutes ago to marry you tonight because your board of directors is trying to control your life." Alexander nodded once. "That is the simple version." Emily shook her head softly, almost smiling at the absurdity. "And you believe this is a reasonable solution?" "It is the most efficient solution," he replied. She hesitated, then asked the question that had quietly settled in her mind. "If you are really a billionaire, why not ask someone you already know?" Alexander glanced toward the city skyline, rising above the rain-soaked street. "Because everyone I know would want something in return." Emily crossed her arms, considering his answer. "And you believe I will not?" Alexander met her gaze again. "I believe you are someone who just lost everything she thought she wanted. Which means you understand honesty tonight better than most people." Emily looked down at her empty hand where the engagement ring had been only minutes earlier. The skin still felt strangely light without it. Her future had been carefully planned for 3 years, and it had vanished in less than a minute. Perhaps that was why the stranger's impossible proposal did not feel entirely impossible anymore. "What exactly would this marriage involve?" she asked quietly. Alexander spoke with the same measured clarity he had used since the beginning. "A legal marriage filed tonight at the city courthouse. You would live in my residence for 1 year. During that time you would attend public events with me when necessary so that our marriage appears legitimate. In return you would receive full financial security and complete freedom to leave after 12 months. Emily raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like a contract." Alexander reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a thin leather folder. "It is a contract." Emily stared at the folder for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or walk away. Alexander opened it and revealed a neatly printed document already prepared with precise legal language. I anticipated that I might need to act quickly tonight, he explained calmly. Emily let out a soft breath of disbelief. You carry marriage contracts with you? Only on complicated evenings. She studied the paper under the streetlight. The terms were simple, almost surprisingly fair. 1 year. Complete privacy. No personal obligations beyond public appearances. And a financial arrangement that would erase every worry she had carried for the last decade. Emily closed the folder slowly and handed it back to him. This is insane, she said. Alexander nodded slightly. Yes. She looked once more at the glowing ballroom where her past life had collapsed, and then back at the mysterious man standing in the rain, as if offering her a doorway into a completely different world. If I say yes, she asked softly, what happens next? Alexander opened the car door beside them and gestured toward the quiet interior. Then we drive 3 miles to the Manhattan City Courthouse, he said calmly. And by midnight, Emily Carter, you will officially be my wife. Emily Carter stood there for one last moment as rain whispered across the quiet street and the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. Only 15 minutes earlier she had been inside the Grand Wellington Hotel, believing she was about to celebrate the beginning of a carefully planned future. Now she was standing beside a black luxury sedan with a stranger who claimed that in less than an hour she could become the wife of a billionaire. Her heart was still racing, but strangely the panic had faded. What remained instead was a calm curiosity about the road that had suddenly opened in front of her. Emily looked once more at Alexander Hayes. His expression had not changed since the moment he made the proposal. There was no pressure in his voice and no desperation in his posture. He simply stood there with the quiet patience of a man who was used to making decisions that changed entire companies overnight. Emily inhaled slowly and stepped forward. Without saying anything else, she slid into the passenger seat of the car. The door closed softly behind her. Alexander walked around the front of the vehicle and took the driver's seat. The interior of the car was warm and quiet, the soft leather seats smelling faintly of cedar and polished wood. For a moment neither of them spoke as the engine started and the sedan pulled away from the curb. The Grand Wellington Hotel disappeared behind them in the rearview mirror like the final page of a chapter Emily had never expected to close so suddenly. The streets of Manhattan glowed with late evening traffic as the car moved smoothly through the rain. After several blocks, Emily finally broke the silence. So this is really happening, she said quietly. Alexander kept his eyes on the road but nodded once. Yes. Emily glanced at him. You do realize that tomorrow morning the headlines might say that you married a complete stranger. Alexander allowed a faint smile. Tomorrow morning the headlines will say that the chief executive officer of Hayes Global Holdings is already married. That will be the only part my board of directors notices. Emily leaned back slightly, absorbing the surreal reality of the situation. The name Hayes Global Holdings suddenly echoed in her memory. It was one of the largest technology investment firms in the country, a company that appeared regularly on financial news channels. She turned to him again with a new level of disbelief. You are that Alexander Hayes? Yes. Emily let out a quiet breath. I almost feel like I should apologize for not recognizing you earlier. Alexander shook his head gently. Most people only recognize the headlines. Very few recognize the person. The car slowed as they approached the quiet stone building of the Manhattan City Courthouse. The large clock above the entrance read 11:32 in glowing white numbers. Rain still fell steadily across the empty steps. Alexander parked near the entrance and turned off the engine. For a moment, the only sound inside the car was the soft ticking of the cooling motor. Emily looked toward the courthouse doors, her reflection faintly visible in the rain-covered glass. If I walk through those doors with you, she said slowly, there is no turning back tonight. Alexander nodded with calm certainty. That is correct. Emily sat silently for several seconds, feeling the strange mixture of fear and excitement settling in her chest. Then she reached for the door handle. Well, she said quietly as she stepped out into the cool night air, I suppose every marriage has an unusual beginning. Alexander joined her on the courthouse steps, and together they walked toward the entrance where the lights were still on, and the clerk on duty waited behind a small wooden desk. Within minutes, paperwork was placed in front of them, and 2 simple gold rings were set on the counter. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, only the quiet echo of rain outside the courthouse windows. Yet as Emily Carter signed her name beside Alexander Hayes on the official document, she realized that the most unexpected chapter of her life had just begun. When the courthouse clerk finally slid the signed marriage certificate across the counter, the quiet room felt strangely different. Emily Carter stared at the paper for a moment as if it might disappear if she blinked. Only 1 hour earlier, she had been a woman whose engagement had collapsed in front of hundreds of guests. Now her name was written beside Alexander Hayes on an official document that legally connected their lives. The clerk offered a polite smile as she handed them 2 simple gold rings. There were no speeches and no celebration. The courthouse was nearly empty at this late hour, and the only witnesses were a sleepy security guard and the rain tapping gently against the tall windows. Alexander picked up one of the rings and turned toward Emily. His movements were calm and deliberate, the same composed confidence he had shown all evening. Emily extended her hand slowly, still trying to absorb the surreal moment. The cool metal slipped onto her finger, simple and unadorned, yet somehow heavier with meaning than the diamond ring she had removed earlier that night. Emily picked up the second ring and placed it on Alexander's hand. The clerk stamped the final page with a firm sound that echoed softly through the room. "Congratulations," she said kindly. "You are officially married." The word married lingered in the air as Emily and Alexander stepped back outside into the cool Manhattan night. The rain had softened to a light mist, and the streets were quiet except for the distant hum of traffic several blocks away. Emily looked down at the ring again, then at the courthouse doors behind them. "That was the shortest wedding ceremony in history," she said quietly. Alexander allowed a small smile. "Efficient," he replied. Emily laughed softly under her breath. For the first time since the night began, the laughter felt genuine rather than nervous. They walked back toward the black sedan waiting at the curb. As Alexander opened the passenger door for her, Emily paused and looked up at him. "So what happens now?" she asked. Alexander closed the door once she was seated and walked around to the driver's side before answering. When he started the engine, the warm interior lights glowed softly again. "Now we go home," he said simply. Emily glanced out the window as the car pulled away from the courthouse steps. "Home," she repeated, testing the unfamiliar word. "You're home." Alexander nodded. "For the next year, it will be yours as well." The car moved through the quiet streets of Manhattan, passing tall glass buildings that reflected the city lights across the damp pavement. Emily watched the skyline rise around them with a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Her entire life until this evening had been spent in a small apartment above a neighborhood bookstore in Brooklyn. The world Alexander Hayes belonged to felt impossibly distant from the one she knew. After several minutes, the car turned toward a wide avenue lined with modern towers of steel and glass. Eventually, they stopped in front of a sleek residential building that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night sky. A uniformed doorman stepped forward immediately as Alexander parked. Emily stepped out of the car and looked up. The building had dozens of glowing windows climbing higher than she could easily count. Alexander joined her on the sidewalk and gestured toward the entrance. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," he said calmly. The words sent a small wave of disbelief through her chest. Emily Carter had walked into the courthouse as a woman whose future had collapsed. Less than 2 hours later, she was standing in front of one of the most exclusive residential towers in Manhattan with a new name, a new life, and a husband she had only just met. Emily Carter stepped through the glass doors of the towering Manhattan residence beside Alexander Hayes, and the quiet elegance of the lobby made her pause for a moment. The floor was polished marble that reflected the soft glow of golden lights above, and tall arrangements of white orchids stood beside the reception desk like silent sculptures. The doorman greeted Alexander with respectful familiarity and nodded politely toward Emily, already recognizing that the woman beside him now carried the name Hayes. Emily felt the strange weight of that realization again as they crossed the lobby toward a private elevator at the far end of the hall. Alexander pressed a small keycard against a discreet panel and the elevator doors opened silently. Inside, the walls were mirrored and softly lit, reflecting both of them standing side by side in a quiet stillness that felt almost surreal. As the elevator began to rise, Emily glanced at the digital display above the door. The numbers climbed steadily past the 20th floor, then the 30th, then the 40th. She folded her arms lightly and let out a quiet breath. I have never been this high above Manhattan before, she admitted. Alexander leaned casually against the rail. You get used to it. Emily gave a small smile. I am not sure anyone truly gets used to something like this. The elevator slowed gently before the doors opened into a private hallway with dark wood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city skyline. Alexander stepped forward and unlocked a large door at the end of the corridor. When Emily entered behind him, she stopped immediately. The apartment was not simply large. It felt almost like a modern gallery suspended above the city. Soft lights illuminated wide, open spaces, elegant furniture, and an entire wall of glass that revealed the night view of Manhattan stretching endlessly in every direction. Far below, the streets shimmered with traffic and distant headlights like rivers of moving light. Emily walked slowly toward the windows, almost afraid to touch anything in the quiet, luxurious space. You live here alone? She asked softly. Yes, Alexander replied. Emily looked back at him with a hint of disbelief. This entire place belongs to one person? Alexander shrugged slightly. Technically. Emily turned back toward the view again, trying to imagine waking up every morning in a home like this. It felt like stepping into a completely different universe from the small apartment above the Brooklyn bookstore where she had spent the last several years. Alexander moved toward a nearby counter and poured 2 glasses of water before handing one to her. There is something important we should discuss before tomorrow morning, he said calmly. Emily accepted the glass and nodded. The rules of our arrangement, she guessed. Alexander gave a small approving smile. Exactly. He walked over to a sleek table where the leather folder containing their agreement rested. Opening it again, he spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown since the beginning. Our marriage will appear completely real to the public. We will attend certain events together, share public appearances when necessary, and present ourselves as a united couple. However, privately we will respect each other's independence. Emily listened carefully, appreciating the straightforward honesty in his tone. And after 1 year? She asked. Alexander closed the folder. After 1 year you are free to leave with complete financial security and no obligations. Emily considered that quietly. She walked toward the window again and looked out at the vast, glowing city beneath them. Only hours earlier she had been standing inside a crowded ballroom, watching her future fall apart. Now she was standing 50 floors above Manhattan, wearing a simple gold wedding ring beside a man whose life seemed to operate on an entirely different scale. You know, Emily said thoughtfully, still gazing at the city lights. Most people spend their entire lives dreaming about a moment that changes everything. She glanced down at the ring on her finger. I just did it in 1 evening. Alexander studied her for a moment, then replied quietly. Sometimes the most unexpected decisions lead to the most interesting stories. And as Emily Carter stood there in the quiet penthouse of Alexander Hayes, she began to realize that the agreement they had signed might be far more complicated than either of them originally expected. Morning arrived quietly over Manhattan, the first pale light of dawn spreading across the endless glass towers outside the penthouse windows. Emily Carter woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her. For several seconds, she lay still beneath the soft white blankets, listening to the distant hum of the waking city far below. Then her memory returned all at once. The hotel ballroom, the broken engagement, the courthouse, the simple gold ring now resting on her finger. Emily sat up and looked around the elegant guest bedroom Alexander had shown her the night before. The room was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment, with tall windows framing the sunrise over the East River. She walked to the window and wrapped her arms lightly around herself, staring at the glowing skyline as the early morning traffic began to move like thin rivers of light across the bridges. Somewhere in the city below, millions of people were beginning ordinary days. Yet nothing about her own morning felt ordinary anymore. After a few minutes, Emily left the room and stepped into the main living area of the penthouse. The apartment was quiet except for the faint sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Alexander Hayes stood near the counter dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, already prepared for the day ahead, as if last night had been just another item on his schedule. He looked up when he saw her enter. Good morning, he said calmly. Emily gave a small smile. You look like someone who sleeps very well after spontaneous weddings. Alexander allowed a faint, amused expression. I sleep well after solving complicated problems. He handed her a cup of coffee. Emily wrapped her hands around the warm mug, grateful for the normal feeling of something so simple. And am I officially part of the solution now? She asked lightly. Alexander walked toward the wide windows overlooking the city and gestured toward the skyline. In approximately 45 minutes, the financial news networks will begin reporting that I am married, he explained. By the time the stock market opens, every member of my board will know that their arrangement with the investor family has collapsed. Emily leaned against the counter, absorbing the reality of what he was saying. So today your entire company discovers that you married a woman they have never heard of. Alexander nodded once. Correct. Emily took a slow sip of coffee and studied him thoughtfully. I suppose that means I should prepare for a very unusual introduction. Alexander turned back toward her. There will be a press conference this afternoon at Hayes Global Headquarters. The board will expect to see us together. Emily raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. Your first public appearance as a married couple. Yes. Emily looked down briefly at the simple ring on her hand before glancing up again. You do realize that I have never attended a press conference in my life. Alexander gave a small, reassuring nod. That is why my assistant will arrive shortly with someone who can help you prepare. Emily tilted her head slightly. Prepare how? As if answering the question, the elevator doors opened softly across the penthouse living room, and a well-dressed woman stepped inside, carrying several garment bags and a tablet computer. She smiled politely when she saw Emily. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes, she said professionally. Emily blinked at the unfamiliar title again. The woman continued speaking with efficient warmth. My name is Claire Bennett. Mr. Hayes asked me to help introduce you to the world. Emily glanced at Alexander, who simply nodded with quiet confidence. And in that moment, Emily Carter realized that within a few hours, she would not only be the mysterious new wife of one of the most powerful men in Manhattan, she would also be standing beside him in front of cameras, reporters, and an entire corporate empire that had no idea who she truly was. The transformation began faster than Emily Carter could have imagined. Within 30 minutes, the quiet penthouse living room had turned into something that felt like a private studio. Garment bags were opened across the marble counter, soft fabrics unfolded, and Claire Bennett moved through the room with the calm precision of someone who had handled situations like this many times before. Emily stood near the tall windows watching Manhattan fully wake beneath the morning sun, while Claire held up a tailored ivory dress beside her. This will photograph well under studio lighting, Claire explained gently. Emily turned from the window and looked at the elegant dress with quiet disbelief. Only yesterday, she had been wearing comfortable sweaters behind the front desk of a neighborhood library. Now someone was preparing her wardrobe for international financial news coverage. You move quickly, Emily said softly. Claire smiled with polite confidence. The world around Mr. Hayes moves quickly. We simply keep up. A professional stylist soon arrived with a small case of makeup and brushes, and within minutes Emily was seated at the dining table, while Claire reviewed a tablet displaying headlines already beginning to spread across online news platforms. One headline read, Tech billionaire Alexander Hayes marries in secret ceremony. Another speculated about the mysterious woman who had appeared beside him overnight. Emily watched the words scroll across the screen with a strange sense of distance, as if they were describing someone else entirely. Across the room, Alexander stood near the kitchen island, speaking quietly on his phone with the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing enormous decisions before breakfast. When he ended the call, he walked toward Emily and Claire. The board meeting has already been delayed, he said calmly. Several investors want clarification. Claire nodded once. The press conference will answer that. Emily looked up at him. So this is really happening. Alexander met her gaze with the same steady composure he had shown since the moment they met beneath the rain outside the hotel. Yes. Claire stepped back slightly and studied Emily with a professional eye. We have 40 minutes before departure, she said. You will simply stand beside him, answer a few questions if asked, and remain calm. Most reporters will focus on Mr. Hayes. You only need to be authentic. Emily gave a quiet smile. Authentic I can manage. By late morning, the black sedan once again carried them through Manhattan traffic, but the city looked different to Emily now. Digital billboards displayed financial headlines. News vans were already gathering outside the towering headquarters of Hayes Global Holdings. The glass building rose more than 60 floors above the avenue, its reflective surface catching the bright sunlight as reporters crowded near the entrance with cameras and microphones. When the car stopped at the curb, Emily saw dozens of journalists turning toward them instantly. Camera flashes sparked like tiny bursts of light across the sidewalk. For a brief moment, Emily felt her heartbeat quicken, but Alexander stepped out of the car first and calmly extended his hand toward her. Emily placed her hand in his and stepped onto the pavement beside him. The murmurs of the crowd rose immediately as reporters called out questions from every direction. "Mr. Hayes, is it true you married last night? Who is your wife? Was this arranged to stop the merger?" Alexander did not respond immediately. He simply walked beside Emily through the glass doors of the headquarters lobby, where security guided them toward the large press room already filled with cameras. When they stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, the sudden brightness of television lights filled the space. Alexander stood behind the microphone and waited for the room to settle. Then he spoke with calm certainty. "Good afternoon. Yes, the reports are correct. Last night I married my wife, Emily Hayes." Emily stood beside him, feeling the weight of dozens of cameras focused on her at once, realizing that in less than 24 hours her quiet life had transformed into something the entire city was now watching. The press room fell into a brief silence after Alexander Hayes spoke the words that confirmed the rumors spreading across the city. The cameras continued flashing, capturing every angle of the mysterious woman now standing beside one of the most powerful executives in Manhattan. Emily Hayes felt the bright lights warming her face as dozens of reporters leaned forward with new questions already forming. Yet strangely, the nervousness she expected did not overwhelm her. Instead, she remembered the quiet conversation from the night before, the agreement they had signed, and the calm certainty in Alexander's voice when he promised that everything would make sense soon. A reporter in the front row raised her hand first. "Mr. Hayes, investors believed you would soon be engaged to the daughter of the Harrington Investment Group. Does this marriage change those plans?" Alexander rested his hands lightly on the podium and answered without hesitation. "Yes, those plans are no longer relevant." Another reporter quickly spoke up. "Can you explain why you married so suddenly?" Alexander glanced briefly toward Emily before responding. "Sometimes the most important decisions in life do not follow a schedule created by other people." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, but the curiosity only grew stronger. "Mrs. Hayes," another journalist called gently, "can you tell us how you met your husband?" For the first time, the room turned its full attention toward Emily. She stepped slightly closer to the microphone, aware that every camera lens had now focused on her. For a moment, she thought about everything that had happened in less than a single day. The broken engagement, the rain outside the hotel, the unexpected offer from a stranger, the courthouse, the quiet penthouse overlooking the city. Emily allowed herself a small, honest smile. "Sometimes life changes when you least expect it," she said calmly. "Yesterday evening, I thought my future had disappeared. Instead, it turned out to be the beginning of something completely different." The room grew quiet again as reporters quickly wrote down her words. Alexander watched her with a faint expression of approval before continuing the conference. "Hayes Global will continue operating exactly as planned," he announced confidently. "The leadership of this company will not be influenced by external arrangements or financial pressure." The statement landed clearly. Several reporters exchanged glances, already understanding the deeper meaning behind it. The merger strategy that investors had tried to force through marriage alliances had quietly collapsed the moment Alexander Hayes married someone outside their control. After several more questions, the press conference ended, and security gently guided the reporters toward the exits while assistants began shutting down the cameras. Emily stepped away from the stage and finally exhaled. The room suddenly felt quieter now that the attention had faded. Alexander approached her with a calm expression. "You handled that well," he said. Emily let out a small laugh. "I still feel like I stepped into someone else's story." Alexander looked toward the tall windows of the headquarters building where the afternoon sunlight reflected across the city skyline. "Perhaps," he replied thoughtfully, "but sometimes the most unexpected stories become the most meaningful ones." As they walked together toward the elevator, Emily glanced once more at the simple gold ring on her finger. Only 24 hours earlier, she had believed her life was falling apart. Now she stood beside a man whose world had completely reshaped her future in a single night. And somewhere deep inside, she could not help wondering if the marriage that began as an agreement might one day become something far more real than either of them had planned.